Okay, so today we're switching gears a bit. We're putting aside the usual data and reports for something, well, something truly magical.
Yeah, definitely a change of pace. We're diving into the very first book of a series that, just captured the world, didn't it? J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
Or right, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone for many of our listeners outside the U.S.
That's the one. And like you said, we're not just here to recap the story. Everyone pretty much knows the basics.
Right. Our plan is to really dig deep into the sources we've gathered, academic critiques, fan analyses, research papers, and obviously bits from the book itself.
The goal is to unpack why this book works so well, what makes it such a solid foundation for everything that comes after.
Exactly. Think of this as like an analytical guide. We want to pull out the key insights, the way the world is built, how the characters are first presented, the themes that are set up right from the start.
We're aiming to explore why it resonates so deeply, you know? What are the layers that critics and readers keep finding? And maybe answer some questions a really curious reader or even a student looking at the text might have.
Because the sources we have offer so many different angles, right?
Yeah.
Perspectives you might totally miss on a casual read.
Definitely. We're hoping to pull out those crucial nuggets of understanding. So yeah, get ready to really unpack the magic, the world building, and the absolute heart of this story.
Let's do it. So our analytical journey has to start where Harry's does, which is ironically a place designed to feel completely non-magical. Privet Drive. What do the sources really emphasize about that environment?
Oh, they're pretty unanimous and quite stark, actually. They describe his life with the Dursleys using terms like outrageous neglect.
Outrageous neglect. Wow.
Yeah, and consistent emotional and verbal abuse. It's not subtle.
So it's not just like an unhappy childhood. The sources get specific.
They do. They detail him living in a cupboard under the stairs. His cousin Dudley is physically abusive, prodding, pinching him. It paints a picture of just, well, sustained mistreatment.
And the Dursleys themselves, their mindset is key here too, isn't it?
Absolutely. Their view of the Potters and anyone from the magical world they call them, their kind, it's just filled with disdain. Fear, too.
Especially Vernon Dursley, right? The sources mention his aversion, his fear of magic. He actively tries to pretend it doesn't exist, convinced it couldn't affect them.
Yeah, and one source quotes that line from the book, how very wrong he was. That complete denial, the rejection of magic by the Dursleys, is analyzed as being really critical for the whole story.
How so? What functions does this oppressive start serve, according to the analysis?
Well, on a basic level, it completely isolates Harry. It highlights how little he knows about who he really is, his parents, his history. He's literally kept in the dark in that cupboard.
Right. He has no context for anything strange that happens around him.
Exactly, and that sets up this incredibly stark contrast with the wizarding world he's about to discover. You know, the bleaker the starting point, the more dazzling the magic seems when it finally arrives.
Makes sense. The darkness makes the light brighter.
Yeah, and the sources also suggest this neglectful childhood is actually fundamental in shaping Harry's character, specifically his humility.
Humility. How does neglect lead to humility?
Well, their argument is that because he was never treated as someone who was special, even though he's secretly famous, he doesn't develop this sense of entitlement. He arrives at Hogwarts quite grounded, despite everything.
That's a really interesting take, that the abuse, awful as it is, kind of inadvertently builds this core positive trait.
That's the idea presented. It ensures he learns early on that respect was not readily given and must be achieved. It's not something he expects just because of his name.
Okay.
Now, one source brings up a really interesting and kind of controversial point about Dumbledore's involvement here.
Oh. What did the sources say about Dumbledore's role in the Privet Drive situation?
Well, this particular analysis points out that Dumbledore seemingly knew Harry would be mistreated. He absolutely knew.
He knew, and still left him there.
Yes. The source acknowledges Dumbledore's official reason, the powerful blood protection from Lily's sacrifice, which needed Harry to live with blood relatives.
Right, the magic required it.
But this source offers a critical view. It argues that Dumbledore also saw it as a way to prevent Harry from being spoiled by fame. The wizarding world would have put him on a massive pedestal, right, which could have led to arrogance.
So the argument is Dumbledore made a calculated choice, balancing physical safety, this blood protection, against Harry's emotional well-being and character development. A very harsh calculation.
Precisely. It's presented as a point of debate in the sources. Was it a necessary evil for protection and humility, or was it, enabling abuse? Either way, this grim beginning makes the eventual call to adventure incredibly powerful.
And that call, it doesn't just knock politely, does it? It's relentless.
Oh, absolutely. The magic world starts trying to reach him with just like a flood of letters addressed directly to him, even Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs.
That specificity is chilling, isn't it?
Yeah.
Knowing they knew exactly where he was.
It is. And the sources describe Uncle Vernon's reaction, just increasingly frantic, almost farcical attempts to stop these letters.
Moving him out of the cupboard, boarding up the house, fleeing to that remote hut on a rock. His desperation is almost funny if it wasn't so sad.
Right. He's trying to physically block magic. But, as the sources emphasize, magic finds a way. When the letters don't work, the messenger arrives.
Hagrid. Ruby's Hagrid.
The half-giant himself, bursting through the door in that storm. I mean, talk about a literal breaking down of Harry's confined world. It's such an iconic image.
And Hagrid's reaction when he finds out Harry knows nothing.
It's brilliant. He's genuinely appalled, sputtering, that Harry knows nothing about anything magical. It just highlights the Dursleys' success in suppressing everything.
Until that moment. And then Hagrid delivers the line that just changes Harry's entire existence.
You're a wizard, Harry. Simple as that, but it rewrites his whole reality.
Yeah. Hagrid then just systematically tears down every lie the Dursleys fed him. His parents were wizards. They didn't die in a car crash.
And the big one, they were murdered. Murdered by he who must not be named, Voldemort.
It's a total paradigm shift for Harry. He learns the truth about his past. He learns there's this whole hidden magical world he belongs to. And maybe the most shocking thing for a boy treated like dirt,
that he's famous, incredibly famous in this world he never knew existed.
Hagrid tells him, doesn't he? Harry Potter, not a wizard you wait. You'll be right famous at Hogwarts.
Yeah, and the sources point out what a massive burden that is for an 11-year-old, especially one coming from neglect. Hagrid tries to soften it a bit, adding, you've been singled out, and that's always hard, but you'll have a great time at Hogwarts. Sort of balancing the fame with the promise of finally belonging somewhere.
And then Hagrid gives him the actual keys to this new life, doesn't he?
Oh, he does. The ticket for the Hogwarts Express, leaving from the mysterious platform 9 3-courses, and his owl, Hedwig. The first tangible connections, the first real proof.
The door's blown open, and the path is right there.
And that path leads straight into the heart of the wizarding world, starting with Diagon Alley.
Diagon Alley. The sources describe getting there through the Leaky Cauldron pub, right? Hidden in plain sight in London.
Exactly. Packed with muggles, non-magical people, of course, as the book says. It emphasizes how this world exists parallel to ours, just concealed.
But then you step through that brick wall.
And it's just this sensory overload. The sources really capture this. It's an explosion of sights, sounds, smells for Harry and for us reading along. Shops overflowing with weird stuff, fangs, eyeballs, cauldrons, spellbooks, stacked high, strange pets.
So different from Privet Drive's sterile order. It's chaotic, vibrant, colorful, unapologetically magical.
Totally. And he gets his inheritance from Gringotts, the wizard bank run by goblins. Another immediate introduction to the fact that this world isn't just humans with wands, it has its own beings, its own economy.
And then the shopping for school supplies, robes, books, potion ingredients, and the really crucial stop.
Ollivanders. Makers of fine wands since 382 BC.
The only place to get a wand, apparently.
Seems like it. And Mr. Ollivander himself, he's described as ancient, a bit unsettling with those pale eyes. The whole process of Harry getting his wand is treated as really significant in the sources.
He tries a bunch of wands, doesn't he? Ollivander calls him a tricky customer.
Yeah, implying it's not just about picking one you like. There's a deeper connection. The wand chooses the wizard, as they say.
Until he finds the one. Holly and Phoenix Feather.
And Ollivander's reaction is key. He's fascinated, calls it curious, mysterious. He knows this wand is unusual.
And then the bombshell. The connection to Voldemort.
Right. The phoenix that gave the feather for Harry's wand only ever gave one other feather, and that feather is in Voldemort's wand.
Wow. I mean, talk about foreshadowing. It physically links them, right there in the wand shop, beyond just the scar.
Exactly. It gives Ollivander's comment about Harry being famous for what happened that night so much more weight. The brother wands were involved in that event. The sources really analyze this, how it sets up this immediate, almost fated bond or opposition between hero and villain.
The sources also talk about what wands actually do, right? They're not the source of the magic itself.
Correct. They explain that wands are primarily tools. They help to channel and focus the wizard's own magical power, make it more precise, more potent.
But not strictly necessary for everyone.
Not for the really powerful or skilled. The sources mention that high-level wandless magic is definitely a thing. They point to figures like Dumbledore, Voldemort, maybe even Quirrell later on, performing significant magic without needing a wand in hand.
So wands are like standard equipment, especially for learning and for dueling, but being without one is a major handicap.
Very much so. And sources mention specific skills like wandless apparition teleporting without a wand being seen as incredibly difficult and impressive. It shows that raw power or specific training can bypass the wand, but for most wizards, most of the time, it's essential.
Okay, so it establishes the rules. Wands are critical, especially starting out, but the magic ultimately comes from the wizard. Got it. So after the wonders and revelations of Diagon Alley, the next big step is getting to school.
The Hogwarts Express, which means finding platform 9 3/4
Harry's first real test of navigating this hidden world alone, isn't it? Trying to find a platform that doesn't seem to exist.
It is, and luckily he overhears the Weasley family. They're talking loudly about muggles and the platform, which gives him the clue he needs to just, well, run at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10.
A leap of faith, literally.
And on the train, that's where the really core relationships start to form. He meets Ron Weasley almost immediately.
And they bond pretty instantly, don't they? Sharing wizarding sweets, talking, just two boys heading off to school.
Yeah, that easy friendship starts right there. And then, a bit later, Hermione Granger makes her appearance.
Initially seeming quite intense, a bit of a know-it-all, asking about Neville's lost toad, fixing Harry's glasses.
Definitely makes an impression. It sets up that initial dynamic, which, as we know, evolves quite a bit.
And the journey ends with the arrival at Hogwarts itself. That first view of the castle must be breathtaking.
Oh, absolutely. The book describes them crossing the dark lake in boats, seeing the castle all lit up against the night sky. It's designed to inspire awe, a sense of ancient magic and mystery.
Then you're met by Professor McGonagall. Stern but fair is how the sources often describe her initial impression.
Yes, she embodies that kind of traditional authority figure. And then you get your first taste of the castle's more unusual inhabitants.
The ghosts.
Right. The sources mention the Fat Friar and, of course, Peeves the Poltergeist. Percy Weasley, Ron's older, rule-following brother, warns the first years about Peeves.
And Peeves immediately causes trouble, dropping walking sticks.
Exactly. It adds this layer of chaotic, lived-in history to the place. It's not just a pristine, magical castle. Things happen here.
So you're immersed in this amazing place. What about learning magic itself? Do we see much of that early on?
The sources note that specific first-year spells aren't really detailed in this book, beyond things like Wingardium Leviosa later, but a major introduction to practical magic comes through Quidditch.
Ah, yes. The wizarding sport. Flying lessons happen early, and Harry's a natural.
Instantly. Professor McGonagall spots his talent immediately, as does Oliver Wood, the Gryffindor team captain. He's recruited as Seeker, which is unheard of for a first year.
And the sources take time to explain the game, right? The different players and balls.
They do. You've got the 3 chasers trying to score with the quaffle, the keeper defending the goal hoops, 2 beaters batting away the dangerous bludgers with clubs, and the Seeker Harry's position looking for the tiny, fast, golden snitch.
Catching the snitch ends the game and gets your team 150 points.
And this is where some sources get quite critical.
About Quidditch?
Yeah. Multiple sources looking at it from like a game design perspective argue that the scoring is fundamentally broken. That 150 points for the snitch basically makes the rest of the game, the quaffle scoring, almost irrelevant most of the time.
I can see that. If the snitch catch is worth that much and ends the game, why bother with the 10-point goals?
That's the critique. Why have chasers and keepers if it usually comes down to the seekers? One hypothesis offered in the sources is that Quidditch maybe didn't evolve as a perfectly balanced competitive sport.
What then?
Maybe it evolved more from something like aerial duels or displays into a spectator event. Something designed for drama, for crowd-pleasing moments, for economic reasons perhaps, or even just releasing social tension rather than pure, fair competition.
So the weird rules, the high risk of injury, the unpredictable game length, they make sense if the point is spectacle, not necessarily balanced sport.
That's the argument presented in some analyses. It creates high stakes and dramatic finishes, even if the core mechanics seem unbalanced. They do mention the World Cup final later in the series where the snitch doesn't decide the winner as a notable exception, but generally the critique holds. It definitely makes for exciting reading, though.
High drama is definitely a key ingredient, especially when we talk about how the core friendship group, the Golden Trio, actually forms. That's central to this book.
Absolutely the emotional heart. So we saw Harry and Ron meet on the train, that instant connection.
Hermione comes along, initially maybe a bit abrasive, focused on rules and showing her knowledge, not an immediate click with the boys.
No, not at all. It takes a really significant, dangerous event to forge that bond, the troll incident.
Right, on Halloween, Ron says something mean about Hermione not having friends.
Yeah, really insensitive. And she overhears and spends the afternoon crying in the girls' bathroom. Later during the feast, Professor Quirrell bursts in shouting about a troll in the dungeons.
But Harry and Ron realize the troll isn't in the dungeons. It's likely near where Hermione is.
Exactly. They realize she's alone and in danger. So despite being terrified first years, they sneak off to warn her. The sources describe them ducking down, finding a deserted side corridor, really emphasizing the risk they're taking.
And they find the troll cornering Hermione in the bathroom.
And somehow, between Harry's reckless bravery jumping on its back, sticking his wand up its nose, and Ron managing to remember and successfully cast the levitation charm, Wingardium Leviosa,
Knocking the troll out with its own club.
they actually defeat it. It's chaotic, messy, but they do it.
And the aftermath is what really solidifies them, isn't it, when the professors arrive?
Totally. This is the key moment analyzed in the sources. Professor McGonagall is furious, ready to punish Harry and Ron severely. But Hermione does something completely unexpected.
She lies.
She lies to a teacher. She claims she went looking for the troll, thinking she could handle it, and that Harry and Ron saved her life. It completely protects them.
Which is huge, coming from the girl who, just hours before, was correcting their spell pronunciation. Ron's reaction in the book sums it up. Hermione Granger telling a downright lie to a teacher.
It's a turning point, and McGonagall's reaction is also really interesting. She takes points from Gryffindor for Hermione's supposed foolishness and lying.
But then she awards points to Harry and Ron for sheer dumb luck and tackling a mountain troll.
Highlighting that sometimes the courage shown, the act of saving someone, can outweigh breaking the rules. It establishes a key theme.
And the sources see this incident as the moment the trio truly forms. It establishes their core dynamic.
Exactly. You see Harry's innate courage and instinct to protect. You see Ron's loyalty in finding bravery, plus that flash of strategic spell use. And you see Hermione's quick thinking under pressure, and crucially, her willingness to bend her strict principles for her friends.
It's the fire that forges their bond. They become this found family, totally reliant on each other in this new world.
That bond becomes the bedrock for everything else they face, starting right here in Book 1.
Okay, so with those relationships forming, let's maybe zoom in on the individual characters introduced here. What are the initial impressions and key traits highlighted by the sources?
Starting with Harry himself, naturally. The sources consistently describe him as modest, almost uncomfortable and insecure with all the fame and attention he gets right away.
Which can expect to the Dursleys, right? That neglect shaped him.
Yeah, the analysis is that because he was never treated as special, he values respect that's earned, not just given because of his name or scar. He also shows this natural talent, especially for flying, that's spotted immediately.
And the sources mentioned his own thoughts about maybe having a dark side.
They do. There's debate in the analysis whether this is just his personality formed by trauma and his internal struggles, or if it's an early hint of the literal piece of Voldemort's soul inside him. Book 1 leaves it ambiguous.
Okay. What about Ron, Harry's first real friend?
Ron Weasley. He's presented as fiercely loyal almost instantly. He's also Harry's guide to the everyday wizarding world, coming from an established, albeit poor, pureblood family. Sources do note moments of envy, though.
Envy towards Harry.
Yeah, initially, like towards Harry's fame, maybe his money, and definitely the Nimbus 2000 broomstick Harry gets, which is top of the line compared to Ron's old hand-me-down. It's understandable, adds a layer of realism to his character.
But overall, he's the loyal sidekick.
He's definitely loyal, provides humor, practical support, and as we see later in the challenges, he has a knack for strategy, especially with wizard's chess.
And Hermione, the brains of the operation.
Hermione Granger, yeah. Introduced as incredibly book-smart, super prepared, muggle-born, so she's learned everything from books before arriving. Sources mention her saying she'd read all about Hogwarts and its subjects.
Some sources question how realistic that is for an 11-year-old muggle-born, right? To have read a history of magic and magical theory already.
Yeah, there's some debate there versus maybe Harry or Ron, who grew up hearing about it. But the consensus is she's exceptionally bright and, importantly, more curious about the theory and rules of magic than the boys are at first.
And she comes across as bossy initially.
A bit, yeah. Eager to prove herself, perhaps. But the troll incident shatters that perception and reveals her immense loyalty and bravery. She becomes the planner, the logician. One source does offer a critique, though.
What kind of critique?
Well, it frames her early approach, maybe her eagerness to correct others or enforce rules, debating if it represents a bad kind of activism if the story doesn't also model the correct kind. It's presented as one critical lens on her initial characterization, not necessarily a widely held view, but it's in our source material.
Interesting. Okay, moving on to the adults. Dumbledore. Powerful, wise headmaster,
Exactly.
but controversial.
Very much so, according to several sources. We already touched on the decision to leave Harry at Privet Drive, the whole blood protection versus enabling abuse debate.
Right. What else do the sources criticize about Dumbledore's actions in this first book?
A big one is the argument that he's essentially raising Harry to be killed by Voldemort.
How so?
By deliberately keeping Harry in the dark about the prophecy that connects them, about why Voldemort targeted him, about the true nature of his scarring connection. Some sources interpret this as Dumbledore strategically using Harry, almost like a pawn or a weapon, willing to let him die based on his understanding of Lily's sacrifice and the prophecy's hints. Either must die.
Wow, that's a dark reading of Dumbledore.
It is. But then paradoxically, he's also the one who hides the Sorcerer's Stone in Hogwarts and sets up the final protection with the Mirror of Erised. Sources say he basically knew Harry, with his pure motive, would be the one to retrieve it.
Suggesting incredible foresight or manipulation, depending on how you look at it.
Exactly. It seems like he orchestrates events to test Harry. And then there's the ending, where he awards those last-minute points to Gryffindor, snatching the House Cup from Slytherin. Some sources question the fairness of that move within the school's own system.
And some fan theories, particularly from the HPMR context mentioned in sources.
Right. Some analytical sources, especially those discussing works like Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, speculate Dumbledore might have known something was off about Quirrell, something specific he chose not to pursue, adding another layer of ambiguity to his character, even in Book 1. This is interpretive analysis, mind you.
Okay. Then there's Snape. Severus Snape.
Potions Master, head of Slytherin. His dislike of Harry is immediate and intense. Sources point out how he singles out famous Harry Potter with barely concealed contempt right from the first potions lesson.
He's set up as the main antagonist for much of the book, isn't he? The one Harry suspects.
He is. But sources analyzing the whole series note hints of his complexity even here. There's speculation he's running his own game. And his hidden protective role towards Harry because of his promise to Harry's mother, Lily, is something Dumbledore seems to rely on, according to some analyses, even though the reader doesn't know the reason yet.
Do the sources think Snape knew Quirrell was hosting Voldemort?
There's debate. Some sources argue yes, some say no, finding the evidence within just Book 1 inconclusive. He's definitely suspicious of Quirrell, but whether he knew the full extent is debated.
And finally, Hagrid.
Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds, half-giant. He's Harry's warm, loyal introduction to the magical world. He reveals Harry's identity, guides him through Diagon Alley, brings him to Hogwarts. Utterly protective.
But flawed.
Very. Sources highlight his carelessness as a major plot point. He accidentally tells Harry, Ron, and Hermione how to get past Fluffy, the three-headed dog.
Which is exactly the information Quirrell needed.
Precisely. Hagrid explicitly lets that slip, enabling Quirrell to get past the first obstacle. And his whole escapade with Norbert the baby dragon also shows his tendency towards, let's say, poor judgment and indiscretion when it comes to dangerous creatures.
So a lovable, vital character? But his mistakes have real consequences. All these characters, their interactions, they revolve around the central MacGuffin, the Sorcerer's Stone.
Right. The Sorcerer's Stone, or Philosopher's Stone outside the U.S., the sources explain it's this legendary alchemical object created by Nicholas Flamel.
Who's mentioned as being a friend of Dumbledore's.
Yep. And its powers are exactly what you'd expect from alchemy. It produces the elixir of life, granting immortality to the drinker.
And it can turn base metals into pure gold, right? Sources mention that in the context of alchemy and Flamel.
Exactly. Immortality and infinite wealth makes it pretty desirable.
Especially to the main antagonist.
Voldemort, who, as the sources clarify, wasn't actually destroyed when his killing curse rebounded off baby Harry. He was ripped from his body, reduced to this weakened spectral form, less than a ghost, barely clinging to life. Sources mention him hiding out in Albania in this state.
And he needs the stone. Why?
To regain a physical body. To come back to full power, he's trapped in this half-life, as Ferenz the Centaur explains later. The elixir is his ticket back.
So Dumbledore, knowing Voldemort might seek it, moves the stone to Hogwarts for safekeeping.
hiding it behind a series of complex, magical protections, each contributed by a different Hogwarts professor.
Fluffy, the three-headed dog, being Hagrid's contribution.
Yes, guarding the trapdoor. And as we said, Hagrid's loose lips accidentally gave Quirrell the key to getting past. Fluffy music sends it to sleep.
So the stage is set. Voldemort needs the stone, Dumbledore hides it, and Harry and his friends stumble into the middle of it all. This leads us to the villainy and foreshadowing in the book.
Voldemort's presence looms large, even though he's physically weak. He's not just a past threat, he's active, seeking resurrection. The sources describe him returning from Albania as this parasitic spirit.
And he finds a host, Professor Quirrell.
The stuttering, seemingly harmless defense against the dark arts teacher. Sources explain Voldemort possesses him, latching onto him, using him to get close to the stone, and, importantly, close to Harry.
Quirrell's change throughout the year is the book's central mystery, really.
It is. From timid teacher to the final villain, there are subtle hints along the way. His odd sickness, that sort of zombiness some sources mention, particularly in the HPMOR analysis context, as a potential clue.
And the injured leg Harry notices after Quirrell's confrontation with Snape in the forest. Harry thinks Snape did it.
But realizes later it must have been Fluffy biting Quirrell when he tried to get past the dog earlier in the year. Direct physical evidence linking Quirrell to the attempt on the stone.
And the most obvious clue, hidden in plain sight, the turban.
Exactly. The sources confirm it's not just for show, it's hiding Voldemort's face, fused to the back of Quirrell's head. A grotesque, parasitic existence.
Some sources, especially fan analyses and those discussing related works like HPMOR, delve into alternative interpretations of Quirrell, don't they?
They do. Some speculate he wasn't just a passive host. Maybe he was controlling a fragment of Voldemort, or had his own complex agenda, perhaps even playing multiple roles. We should stress these are interpretations from specific analytical contexts, ways of reading deeper into the character. The book's reveal is more straightforward.
And that reveal comes in the climax, right, in the final chamber.
Yes. Quirrell confronts Harry, dropping the stuttering act, revealing he was the one after the stone all along, not Snape.
And then the turban comes off.
Showing Voldemort's face, it's a terrifying moment. Voldemort speaks through Quirrell, confirming his need for the elixir, trying to tempt Harry, lying about bringing his parents back.
This confrontation does so much. It confirms Voldemort is alive, an immediate threat, and the ultimate antagonist for the whole series.
Absolutely. It makes his return to power feel inevitable, not just a possibility.
And it cements Harry's position at the center of this conflict. His scar, the brother wands, and his mother's protective magic, which turns out to be lethal to Quirrell Voldemort in this state.
It sets up their struggle as deeply personal, almost fated. The actual prophecy isn't mentioned here, but the seeds are sown. That sense of either must die at the hand of the other is strongly foreshadowed. Some sources analyzing the prophecy later speculate on Voldemort having complex plans involving Harry's dark side to twist the prophecy, but again, that's later interpretation.
Beyond the main plot and characters, sources highlight some really key scenes and objects that have deeper symbolic meaning.
The mirror of Erised is probably the big one in this book.
Erised, desire spelled backwards. What it shows you is your heart's deepest desire.
For Harry, it's heartbreaking he sees his parents, his family alive and surrounding him. It shows his profound longing for connection and love.
And for Ron.
Ron sees himself as head boy, Quidditch captain, holding the house cup, standing out from his brothers. It reflects his own ambitions and insecurities about achievement and recognition.
Dumbledore's explanation is key, though. It shows desire, but not truth or knowledge. People waste away staring at it.
Exactly. It's a warning against living in fantasy. But its role as the final protection for the stone is brilliant.
How did that work again?
Dumbledore enchanted it so only someone who wanted to find the stone, find it, not use it for themselves, could get it. Harry, whose deepest desire wasn't the stone's power but his family, could see the stone in his reflection's pocket because his motive was pure. Quirrell, who desperately wanted to use the stone for Voldemort, just saw himself presenting it to his master.
Wow. Okay. That's clever.
Sources also connect the mirror to alchemy, specifically the Negredo stage.
Negredo. What's that?
It's the first stage, the blackening. Symbolically, it represents dissolution, confronting darkness, reflecting on the shadow self, kind of like a descent before transformation. The mirror forcing you to confront your raw desire fits that symbolism of reflection and descent.
And psychoanalysis, too. seeing subconscious desires.
Yes, that link is made. While some sources apply psychoanalytic ideas like the Oedipus complex more broadly to character dynamics in the series, the mirror is a very direct symbol of those hidden, powerful longings.
Another really significant scene sources analyze is the Forbidden Forest encounter.
Right, during detention, Harry and others have to go with Hagrid to find out what's been attacking unicorns.
They find one dead, and then see this hooded figure drinking the blood of another injured unicorn. It's horrifying.
And Ferenz, one of the centaurs, explains the significance. Drinking unicorn blood keeps you alive even if you're near death, but it's a cursed life, a half-life. Only someone truly desperate, someone who has nothing to lose, would do such a thing.
And he identifies the figure as Voldemort.
Yes. Killing something so pure, so innocent, just to cling to this cursed existence, it really underscores Voldemort's evil and desperation.
The sources connect this to that Legredo idea again.
Some do, yeah. The darkness of the forest, the death of innocence, the unicorn, entering this forbidden, almost underground space, confronting this blood-drinking dark figure, it all carries symbolism of descent, confronting the shadow, much like the alchemical stage or Harry's internal trials.
And finally, the series of challenges guarding the stone. Sources see these as more than just obstacles.
Definitely. They're analyzed as tests of different skills and qualities, showcasing the trio's combined strengths.
So first was Fluffy, Hagrid's three-headed dog, needing music or calmness.
Then Professor Sprout's devil's snare, which requires staying calm and remembering its weakness to light or fire. Hermione knows this.
Then Professor Flitwick's room of winged keys, needing Harry's exceptional flying skills to catch the right one.
Followed by Professor McGonagall's giant wizard's chess set. This requires strategy and, crucially, sacrifice. Ron, being the chess expert, guides them and makes the heroic sacrifice, allowing Harry and Hermione to proceed.
A key moment for Ron's character arc, showing his bravery.
Absolutely. Then there was supposed to be a troll challenge from Quirrell, but he'd already dealt with it. Then Professor Snape's potions riddle,
which Hermione solves using logic, not magic. She even says it's not magic, it's logic.
highlighting her specific strength. And finally, Dumbledore's mirror of Arised, requiring that pure motive which only Harry possesses in that moment.
So the sequence is read as a deliberate showcase. Harry's courage and skill, Ron's strategy and loyalty, Hermione's logic and knowledge. They need each other.
Precisely. It's not about Harry being the sole hero who overcomes everything. It emphasizes teamwork and their complementary strengths right from the start.
Okay, looking at the bigger picture, what are the major themes established in just this first book that carry through this series?
Well, the most obvious is good versus evil. It's clearly set up. Dumbledore and Harry on one side, Voldemort and his followers, like Quirrell, on the other.
But some sources complicate that a bit.
Yeah, one source offers a more nuanced take, suggesting that no one sane actually thinks of themselves as the bad guy. It argues that judging good and evil requires rational intellect and understanding motivations, questioning if someone like Voldemort is truly evil with a capital E or just profoundly bad in his actions. It pushes against a simple black and white view.
Interesting. What other core themes emerge?
Choice versus destiny is huge right from the start.
The Sorting Hat wanting to put Harry in Slytherin.
Exactly. And Harry actively choosing not Slytherin, it emphasizes his agency. Dumbledore reinforces this later, telling Harry it's our choices that define us.
Even with prophecies looming later.
Right. Sources debate how fixed destiny is versus how much the character's choices shape events, even within the framework of prophecy. It's a central tension.
Friendship and loyalty are clearly vital.
Absolutely fundamental. The bond between Harry, Ron, and Hermione is forged in danger and loyalty, Hermione lying for them, Ron sacrificing himself in chess. It's presented as a powerful, almost magical force itself.
And courage and sacrifice follow from that.
Demonstrated constantly by the trio facing the troll, the forest, the challenges. Ron's sacrifice is the most explicit, but Harry facing Voldemort alone also requires immense courage.
The sources also dig into social commentary and allegory within the wizarding world, don't they? Finding parallels to our world.
They do, yeah. A lot of analysis focuses on prejudice. Is the poor treatment of Muggles or the prejudice against Muggle-borns within the wizarding world the better allegory for things like racism?
Sources suggest wizards often view Muggles as less than.
Yeah, based on uninformed and stereotypical views, a lack of understanding or education about them. This dynamic of a dominant group looking down on an other is compared in sources to real-world prejudice, sometimes drawing parallels to things like X-Men or even historical contexts like colonialism or residential schools where one group imposes its values.
And the house elves. That gets compared to slavery.
Very strongly, yes. Sources connect house elf enslavement directly to the history of slavery, especially the domestic servitude of black slaves in the Americas.
Dobby's later desire for freedom is seen as mirroring that struggle.
Exactly. And sources point out how the justifications used within the wizarding world for keeping elves enslaved, like claiming they like it or it's for their own good, are disturbingly similar to historical arguments used to defend real-world slavery.
There's also a connection made to unpaid domestic labor.
Some sources link the idea of elves willingly serving to societal expectations around women's unpaid work in the home, connecting it to Hermione's later activism with SPW. There's also mention in one source of a particularly jarring critique concerning the visual of mounted slave heads with Christmas hats, presented as a deeply problematic element highlighted in some analyses of the world building, though its canonicity or context is sometimes debated. We mention it as it appeared in the source material provided.
Okay. What about class structures?
The blood status hierarchy, pure blood, half-blood, muggle-born, is analyzed by sources through a Marxist lens as a clear class system, showing social stratification and how it can lead to internalized oppression.
And gender roles. Sources critique those too.
Yes. Some critiques argue that the portrayal of gender, especially early on with roles like motherhood or limited depictions of female careers, tends to reinforce traditional stereotypes and, to use the term from the sources, reifies or solidifies systemic oppression of women.
Finally, the sources talk about Harry Potter as magic realism. How does that work?
Magic realism isn't just fantasy. It's defined as using magical elements woven into a realistic setting to comment on or exaggerate aspects of reality.
So Harry Potter fits because the magic world exists alongside and interacts with the real UK.
Exactly. Harry is British, uses the train, the postal service elements of real life exist alongside magic. The sources note the magical world is revealed slowly as it is introduced to Harry, making it feel grounded and believable, like a hidden layer of our own world, not a completely separate dimension.
That integration is definitely part of the appeal. So wrapping up, this first book really does lay an incredible amount of groundwork.
It really does. It successfully introduces all the core players. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Dumbledore, Snape, Hagrid, setting up their personalities and relationships.
It immerses us in the key magical concepts. Wands, spells, creatures, important locations like Hogwarts and Diagon Alley, and even the culture, like Quidditch.
And crucially, it establishes the central conflict with Voldemort. His presence, his goals, and his connection to Harry become the engine driving the entire series.
The book's impact culturally has been huge too, hasn't it?
Massively. Sources talk about how it got a whole generation reading, built this huge fan community.
And encouraged critical thinking.
Yeah, discussions about the themes, friendship, loyalty, ethics, good versus evil. Sources even suggest it influenced how some readers think about social justice or accepting marginalized groups, showing how these fantastical stories can reflect and comment on very real societal issues, especially when you apply those critical lenses.
It's clear the journey only gets deeper and more complex from here, with these characters and themes evolving significantly. But what a powerful start.
It really makes you think about those hidden layers, the choices we make, the families we find.
And it leaves us with that lingering question, doesn't it? Inspired by the mirror of Arised. If you are truly honest with yourself, what is it you most deeply desire?
It's a powerful thought to sit with.
Well, that brings us to the end of this particular deep dive, exploring the sources around Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
We hope digging into these different analyses and layers has maybe given you a fresh perspective on a story you thought you knew well.
If you enjoy this, maybe revisit the book with some of these themes or critical ideas in mind. See what else you discover.
Thanks so much for joining us on this magical exploration.